Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It might not be entirely clear, but I am something of a Transformers fan, and I like to keep up to date on Transformers news and rumors. And while recently doing so, I came across the link to the subject of this video. I almost wrote it off completely, being from CBR, a site notorious for clickbait headlines. But then I started to get morbidly curious about what they consider plot holes and if they truly were plot holes. Now, I am of course familiar with the online reputation for the Transformers movies. I think it's a bit unfair, but people seem to love the movies or hate them, or they think they're okay. On the whole, I think they're on par with the majority of the Marvel fare. By no means are they perfect movies though, and there are certainly valid criticisms. But we're going to look into CBR's list of plot holes and see if these actually are plot holes, and maybe offer up some explanations. Let's talk a little bit about what a plot hole is. A plot hole is not something that is just unclear or unexplained or may not even make sense to you. A simple definition for a plot hole is something that breaks the internal consistency or logic of the story. The Fellowship of the Ring not flying the Eagles to Mount Doom is not a plot hole. On the other hand, the Disney Plus Loki show shows Loki escaping with the the Tesseract. The Avengers has some strange similarities to Transformers Dark of the Moon. Might be the subject for a different video though. Anyway, when Loki escapes from the events in Endgame, he is taken into custody by the Time Variance Authority and put in front of a judge for violating the timeline. He was not supposed to have jumped away with the Tesseract. He rightly questions the judge why the Avengers were not stopped, to which the writers lazily hand-wave the question by saying that they were supposed to have done what they did. Not only does this open a whole new can of worms, not the least of which is, does free will even exist in the MCU? But it gives us a good example of what a plot hole actually is. If Loki was not supposed to jump away to escape the Avengers, then the result of his actions, Tony Stark and Steve Rogers going back to 1970 to acquire a different Tesseract and Pym particles, was not supposed to happen either. You can't have it both ways. Tony Stark and Steve Rogers were not supposed to go back to 1970 if Loki was not supposed to escape, in which case the TVA should have stopped Tony and Steve from violating the timeline. Now that we've talked a bit about plot holes, let's dive into the article and explore these supposed plot holes that they give. Number 10. Transformers' Secret History on Earth. Throughout the franchise, a surprisingly elaborate relationship between humans and Transformers was built. At one point, their connection was shown to go back a few millennia. That in and of itself is a huge plot hole since neither side seems to know this. When the various Autobots and Decepticons land on Earth, they all acted as if they had never heard of the planet before. Yet there's a long-standing history between Cybertron and Earth, with a seemingly endless parade of Transformers showing up. It seems like something they should be aware of. Most humans, myself included, have a small understanding of our own history. It's certainly not a plot hole that some of the characters aren't familiar with the Transformers/human connection. There's only one time when a character is confused where they are, and that's Jetfire, who is an ancient Transformer who had essentially just come out of a coma, but recovers his memory as the scene goes on. Confusing? Maybe. Plot breaking? Definitely not. Number 9. The short memories of humans. That ongoing relationship between Transformers and humans creates another issue as well. Throughout the movies, Transformers keep getting in giant fights all over the planet. One battle even laid waste to Chicago at one point, which is the only confrontation anyone appears to remember. For the most part, humans seem to be surprised when Transformers show up again in the next movie for another war. There are the people who are in the know that keep track of the comings and goings of both sides. At the same time, average humans seem to forget quite quickly about all the gigantic robots. I don't know how much of the movies the writer of the article actually paid attention to. By the way it's written, it seems like the movies were playing in the background while he played Candy Crush on his phone. The previous conflicts were either relatively small and contained, or were mostly relegated to Egyptian deserts. Before the opening battle in Revenge of the Fallen, they specifically say the area was evacuated.
Newsflash from the BBC.
Breaking news out of Shanghai. There's been a major toxic spill in the Shanghai factory district. All
We're
citizens
staying on top of this developing story for you. We will bring you any new information as we get it.
Nest, Seahawks approaching target.
3 minutes until evacuation is complete, sir.
Chinese airspace has been locked and sealed. 1 mile radius.
All right, give Nest team the go.
In the climax for both Transformers and Revenge of the Fallen, the humans' communications technology was disrupted by Decepticon sabotage. The protagonists are forced to use Morse code for communication in the first movie. Because of this, there's not going to be much in the way of Twitter traffic about the situation. There is mention of knowledge of Transformers being classified on several occasions, presumably under some kind of national security orders, which extend to Sam and his family. It seems reasonable that other civilians were included as well. The relatively small amount of Transformer activity that does get out seems to be relegated to the likes of conspiracy theories. Number 8. Megatron is completely MIA from Bumblebee. Bumblebee was the first and so far only prequel movie in the franchise, though it's also a reboot. It showed the origins of the fan-favorite Autobot on Earth in the 1980s, presumably setting him up to meet Sam Witwicky many years down the road. The odd thing about this movie is that Megatron isn't in it at all. While the war that drove the Autobots off Cybertron was depicted, the main enemy was missing from it. This is a weird scenario, seeing Bumblebee on the run without Megatron in the mix. During the run-up to the movie, Paramount was very unclear about where Bumblebee would fit in the timeline of the live-action films, and there are several direct references to the first movie that were created in that movie, showing it is a prequel. Bumblebee officially being a reboot was a post-hoc addition, probably due to its success and to give the new creative team more latitude after Michael Bay's departure. This complaint is not a plot hole in either circumstance, since if we judge this movie as a prequel, Megatron has already left Cybertron at this point in pursuit of the Allspark and is frozen inside the Hoover Dam. Judging this as a reboot, it's still not a plot hole. We only saw a small part of the battle. Megatron is there somewhere, but this is a Bumblebee movie, and adding some kind of conflict between Bumblebee and Megatron, which could have been a cool chase scene or something, ultimately is not necessary and doesn't break the plot. Number 7. Bone Crusher and Blackout surviving. Megatron doesn't have the power to resurrect other Transformers, except in this one film. In the very first Transformers, 2 Decepticons named Bone Crusher and Blackout were killed in the battle, but somehow 2 Decepticons who looked a lot like them were back in action during the next movie. Some fans have suggested that these 2 are different bad guys who just look like Bone Crusher and Blackout. If that's the case, it's just lazy character design. Transformers characters sharing identical bodies has been done since the earliest days of Generation 1 as a fairly cheap way of expanding their product line, and it's an easy way for CGI artists to add more bad guys to battle scenes. These are not the same characters though. None of the media or toys say they are the same characters. It's not a fan theory, they are different characters. And since you seem to be aware of this, Ian, and used it anyway as a way to pad out your list to a round number of 10, is pretty damn lazy yourself. Number 6. Cavemen beating the Fallen. As previously mentioned, there is a surprisingly long and convoluted history between humans and Transformers. It starts almost 20,000 years earlier when the Fallen landed on Earth in an effort to wipe out humanity. Ultimately, the plan was foiled by cavemen. To be clear, cavemen somehow defeated the Fallen. It's never really made completely clear how that happened, and since a modern human army backed by Autobots had problems taking a bunch of evil robots down, it's hard to imagine how cavemen pulled that victory off. Cavemen did not beat the Fallen. The Fallen was on Earth to use it as a place to station his sun harvester to drain the sun for its energy. The sun harvester was not supposed to be used on suns that provide for intelligent life, and when it was discovered that was his intention, the other primes rose up against him and sacrificed themselves to prevent the Fallen from destroying the sun by hiding the Matrix, which is the key to starting the harvest process. This is all explained in the movie. With no reason for being on Earth, why would he stay? Number 5. The sudden appearance of Sentinel Prime. In the second film, the Fallen is the big bad. He really wants to kill Optimus Prime, which is something every bad guy in these movies tries to do. But the Fallen has a very specific reason, in that Optimus is the last Prime, except he isn't. Sentinel Prime is the villain of the third movie. That means Optimus wasn't the last of the Primes, and the Fallen was extremely confused. But that also means that much of his plan made little or no sense, since there would have been at least one more Prime still alive. The Fallen was not confused. If Ian had actually paid attention to the movies, instead of playing Candy Crush, he would have known that Sentinel Prime was deactivated on the moon. He was, for all intents and purposes, dead. The only way for Sentinel Prime to be reactivated was with the Matrix, and since the Matrix was lost, the Fallen had no reason to believe Sentinel Prime was in a position to stop him.
Sentinel Prime. These things run on energon and he's out of it. He's in a sort of a sleep mode.
Let us begin.
It's the great matrix of leadership. He holds the only thing in the universe that can repower a transformer spark.
This is incredible.
Sentinel Prime. We bid you return.
Number 4. Shutting down Sector 7. Throughout the Transformers' time on Earth, there have been groups of humans who were actually aware of their existence. Some have worked with them, while others have fought them. Sector 7 was a secretive government organization tasked with dealing with the threat. But when the war between the Autobots and Decepticons spilled over onto Earth, the response of the United States government was to shut Sector 7 down. While they weren't the most trustworthy group, they were still the best line of defense and the only ones with any intel. This was their time to shine. Why is this a plot hole? Ian seems to understand why Sector 7 was shut down. They were an untrustworthy secret society that had extremely limited oversight and cared little about things like constitutional rights. For some reason, Ian forgets or ignores that they were also replaced in the very next movie by Nest, who were in as good, if not a better position of defending humanity than Sector 7 because they worked directly with the Autobots with the support of Optimus Prime. Number 3. The point at which the Autobots arrive on Earth. In the first movie, Bumblebee is already on Earth on an advanced reconnaissance mission. While it's never established how long he's been on the planet, he's the one who called in the rest of the Autobots, bringing them to Earth. The problem is that Bumblebee, which is set approximately 20 years earlier, shows the Autobots arriving then. Bumblebee is supposedly a reboot of the franchise, but that's also kind of confusing since the characters and overall story are essentially the same, just with some odd inconsistencies. None of the movies make any clear statements about when the Autobots arrived for the very first time. The Autobots have also been shown to operate several ships. Bumblebee as a prequel certainly doesn't break the plot if there were Autobots who came to Earth and then left. Bumblebee being the first movie in a reboot doesn't have any movies to contradict. Number 2. Bumblebee fought in World War II. The fifth film, The Last Night, took another dive into history, showing that Bumblebee fought alongside the Allies in World War II. Apparently he was quite the Nazi-killing machine. That makes sense to an extent as Bumblebee is, first and foremost, a soldier. But how long he was on Earth in the main franchise has never been established. And if Bumblebee is taken into account, the timeline gets even more confusing. In that movie, he arrived on Earth for the first time in the 1980s. It's bizarrely convoluted at this point. Taking Bumblebee as a prequel, it doesn't explicitly state he was traveling to Earth for the first time. Optimus does refer to Earth as well hidden, but if it's been a suitable amount of time, it might have dropped off the Decepticons' radar, so to speak. Later in the movie, when the Decepticons do arrive in the solar system, they seem like they have some sort of familiarity with Earth, mentioning it by name. It's certainly not unknown to them. And finally, number 1. Optimus Prime can suddenly fly. Possibly the biggest inconsistency in the entire franchise happens in Age of Extinction. In the movie, Optimus Prime displays the ability to fly under his own power. The movie even ends with Optimus flying off into space to confront his creators. This utterly blew fans' minds. There were numerous times throughout the previous 3 movies that Optimus Prime being able to fly should have come up, yet it didn't. In Revenge of the Fallen, he even needed special add-ons to fly. This moment broke more than a few brains. This is probably the best complaint on the list, and it's not explained how Optimus suddenly got the ability to fly. In the scene where Optimus plays King Arthur and metaphorically pulls the sword from the stone, you can see his body subtly reconfigure, and if you're not paying attention, you could miss it altogether. He only flies after this happens. I submit that this is where his flight ability is unlocked. Now, it's never explicitly stated, but it does make sense to me, and this is why I don't consider it a plot hole.
recognize one of your knights.
So there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. 10 Transformers plot holes filled. How do you think I did? Do you disagree with my responses? Let me know in the comments below. Or maybe you want to come onto a live stream with me and discuss it. As always, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, this is Prime, signing out.